This week on the Destination Angler.
It's a beautiful, scenic, remote river where you can get, you can get a stretch of river yourself, even in the busy season, if you're willing to walk a little bit. And, there's always a chance of getting a 27-inch brown trout. And I just don't know too many places where you can do that in the Northeast.
That was Brian Comfort on the Deerfield River. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures specially designed to your level of experience and budget. By Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. By Adams Built Fishing Gear, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price. And by Angler's Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. Up next on the Destination Angler, we hit the Little Juniata River in central PA with none other than competition angler extraordinaire Josh Miller. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler Parts 1 and 2 of the Blackfoot River with John McLean. In case you missed it, John is the son of Norman McLean, who wrote A River Runs Through It and shares the fascinating inside story of the book, the movie, and his family. You won't want to miss these shows. And if you like the show, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and tell a buddy. And today our destination is the Deerfield River in western Massachusetts, and our guest is Brian Comfort of the Deerfield Fly Shop. The Deerfield ranks as among the best tailwaters in the Northeast. With diverse hatches and water types, anglers can find great dry fly fishing and escape the crowds on this remote and scenic river. Our guest Brian is one fishy dude, having spent his early years in Wyoming and Colorado, where he guided and worked retail and restaurant jobs to fish as much as possible. Later, he moved back east, entering a PhD program, but instead of studying, you guessed it, he pretty much fly fished and worked in the shop. Lucky for us, Brian is now the proud owner of the Deerfield Fly Shop. Today, Brian shares what makes the Deerfield River so special, how to navigate those multiple dams and tailwaters that make up this system, the major hatches, and how to target those big browns lurking in nearly every hole. As a bonus, Brian shares his experiences with tarpon in the Virgin Islands, giant trout in New Zealand, and the ever-technical Swift River in Massachusetts. Plus, was it a good idea to buy a fly shop during COVID? Let's find out from Brian. All right, well, welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, now we're talking about your intro, and that you've been fishing all over the place, and I'm super interested. Tell me about the Virgin Islands. I've not talked to anybody yet who's been to the Virgin Islands fishing. What were you fishing for down there, and how was it?
Well, actually, I went down there just on a vacation to actually go sailing. And, but I knew, I did a little research, and it's not really well known for its fishing down there, or at least not for fly fishing. But I did find out that on Tortola, there's some bonefish flats. And then I also found out that there are resident tarpon there in the 100 to 200 pound range.
Really?
So that,
oh, man.
Yeah, that kind of sparked my interest. So I brought some rods down with me. Yeah, and it was pretty neat. And, as I said, I was sailing down there, so I wasn't really focused on fishing, but I did go out with a guide for bonefish. We didn't really get into any. I spent, that half day just picking his brain on where I can fish on my own, for the couple of, chunks of time I had, free time I had. And I had a little boat, kind of a dinghy, from the sailboat I was on that I could go after sailing and kind of just cruise around the harbor and look for them. And one evening, I happened to be rolling along. I'd never fished for tarpon before. Didn't really know what to expect. I had a 10-weight rod, but did not have the proper terminal tackle on there by any stretch. But I ran into these tarpon that were just rolling on bait fish right there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I threw out a gurgler, And, and within seconds, I'm hooked up to this, 60, 70 pound tarpon
Oh my gosh.
on this little dinghy.
In a dinghy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got a nice skywalk out of it. My heart is in my throat and, thing tail slapped. And then I got another one and he spit the fly. And,
wow.
It took me a while to stop shaking after that. But not too long because I took, they were still rolling on bait. So I threw it back in there. And sure enough, hooked into another one about the same size. Got a tail walk out of it. And then he broke me off because I didn't have a good bite leader on there. So as soon as that second tarpon hit, he took the fly right off. But
really,
but those two fish,
man.
they ended up costing me a lot of money because they gave me that tropical saltwater bug, and so now I have to go down there and find them again.
Have you been back to the Virgin Islands fishing?
Not to the Virgin Islands though. I would like to. I would definitely like to. I've been to Belize a few times since.
Okay.
And but yeah, no. One of these days I'll get back down there. And hopefully run into those tarpon again, a little bit better prepared.
You sound like the old man in the sea, that book by Hemingway, Santiago, right? With a little dinghy.
No doubt, and I thought about it, kind of even as the fish was on, I was like, I don't even know what to do with this thing once I catch it.
Yeah, right.
So, I don't know, it's just going to capsize the dinghy.
That's
here,
awesome.
but it was a problem I was willing to deal with. So.
Right, yeah, that's a good problem to have. Well, what about New Zealand? How was New Zealand?
New Zealand was great. Yeah, again, that was another thing. I wasn't there to fish, but obviously I knew of New Zealand, so I brought my gear with me, and I was there on a family vacation. And it's everything they say it is. It's the rivers are just unbelievably beautiful. The MO down there is if you see another car in the spot, you drive another couple miles, and and it's very very wild. You got the river to yourself usually. And, even in some of these small creeks, they're, 5-6 pound brown trout and rainbow trout. And it was just spectacular. I only got to fish a few days. But, it was unbelievable, an unbelievable few days. So.
Wow. Did you tangle with some nice trout?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Especially in actually on the North Island, I got into some on these really small streams, they were probably, I don't know, 30 feet across maybe.
Cool.
But loaded with 5, 6, 7 pound trout. And it was just, it took me a while, I hooked one and I just didn't know what to do, because they just take off, because there's no water in there. So they just go running. So the first few I popped, but then I finally realized, kind of how to play them a little bit and got a few to hand. So.
Well, about that.
Yeah. But just such a cool experience, these really wild, wary fish. And big, just so big, and you can see them. The water's crystal clear, and it's just, it was unreal.
Wow, that sounds cool. I did a show in New Zealand. It's actually one of my top shows. I'm supposed to be about North America, but we did a show in New Zealand, and the guy's talking about.
Hey, if you can.
20-pound brown trout.
Yeah, no, there's some monsters, and it's just so beautiful down there, and just just not that many people. It's awesome.
There you go. All right, so that made you crazy for saltwater in New Zealand, and here you are in Massachusetts. So let's talk about Massachusetts, because you've done a lot of fishing around the state. What's the fishing like, just kind of around the state?
Mass is great. It's funny. I lived out west, and that's kind of for a few years, 4 years. Right after college, and that's where I really cut my teeth fly fishing. And and just you think of the West as that's the land of trout, and it's beautiful, and it's And, and then I moved back home, back east, and I was like, oh, this is, somehow diminished, right? Because it's not the West. But moving back here, I realized that there's just some fantastic fishing in the Northeast,
Yeah.
You got to find it. You got to seek it out. Although it's getting better and better known, this was kind of before the days of social media that I'm talking about. But, Massachusetts, what I love about Massachusetts, even kind of that sets it apart from the West is that there's some great trout fishing, but there's, great smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, carp, pike. And then you go to the coast, and you got a totally different kind of fishing with striped bass and false albacore and bonito and bluefish. And it's just the diversity of fishing here is really fantastic, all within a couple hours in either direction.
Yeah, that's cool. Are you catching stripers off the shore, or are you having to get a boat to get out and get after those guys?
Both. Yeah, you don't have to have a boat. you can absolutely catch them from shore, and that's really fun. It's harder. It's certainly easier with a boat, because you can cover more ground and sort of find where the fish are and go to them rather than because they're not always in the same spots. So when you're fishing from shore, there's spots where there will always be schoolies or smaller fish, and those or generally will always be at certain tides, and so that's a fun game to play. But to look for the big fish, it can be hard, but they do come in close, so you can get them, and
That's
it's
cool.
yeah, in some ways more rewarding from shore because it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, right. And what about the trout streams in Massachusetts? Can you name a few of the more well-known ones or popular ones?
Yeah, so I'd say the two best known streams and probably most popular ones are the Swift River and the Deerfield River. The Swift River is kind of, your true classic tailwater. It comes out of the Quabbin Reservoir, which is this really deep reservoir that gives a lot of the drinking water to the Boston area. So that water comes out of the bottom of that. It never gets above the high 50s, even in the dead of summer, and it doesn't, and then again in the winter, it never gets, much colder than 35 or so. So it's one of those classic tailwaters that you hear about. And it's also a little closer to Boston. So it gets quite a bit more pressure too. And there's about, most people fish about a 3 to 4 mile stretch of it. There's probably another 3 to 4 miles that you can fish pretty easily as well. And then there's the Deerfield, which is kind of, I consider it our home river. It's also a tailwater. There are a number of dams on that river, but it is instead of the drinking water reservoir, it's a power generation dams. All the dams are for power generation. So the mentality behind those things are kind of very different. So in the drinking water reservoir, they don't want to ever release water. They just want to sell that water to Boston. They don't want to put it in the Swift River. So there's a minimum flow that goes there, and it keeps that river very consistent. And, except in the most extreme circumstances, that river stays at that same level that, makes it very easy to fish, very consistent. And that's why it's a really good trout fishery because, it's a very consistent river that's, keeps that water in that trout's happy range most of the time. With the power generation dams, they kind of want to crank it through when they want to make energy, and they want to shut it off when they're not making energy.
Right.
And it leads to, so the management is quite different. And so on the Deerfield, we'll go from, on the upper river, we'll go from a minimum flow of 125 CFS to, just a typical release will be between, 700 and 1,000 CFS. So it's, it's a drastic increase. Yeah. And that can happen, every day, for 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes they'll keep it on longer. Sometimes they'll, they won't release, but it's more volatile, I guess.
Okay.
Is the best way to put that.
Do they publish schedules? Are you going to know that, hey, at 3 o'clock or noon?
Yeah, they do, but I don't think that they're not required to strictly stick by them. So you always have to be a little bit wary that they may deviate from that schedule.
Yeah.
Which, when you're talking about a change from 125 to 800, that's in,
in a steep
gradient river. Yeah, you got to get out of the water. Or at least on the side of the river where your car is, or else it's going to be a long walk up that other side of the nearest bridge. Yeah.
Good point. Oh my gosh. Have you been out there and all of a sudden the rocks are disappearing and you go, oh, crud, I got to get out of the river?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. Yeah. And it's, it's funny, and I've gotten in, someone told me this a long time ago, and it was great advice is, look at the rocks near you, especially when you're kind of, it's going to change soon. Look at the rock, pick a rock near you and just mark the level on it and just check it every couple minutes.
Right.
But what I noticed up there is what happens is that you actually hear it before you really see it. Like all of a sudden, you're casting to a fish or something. All of a sudden, it's like you just kind of like, wait a minute, everything just got a little bit louder. And then I'll look at my rock, and sure enough, that water's rising up that rock. Yeah. So yeah, there have been times where I'm like on the other side of the river, so I'm like, trying to run across the river to get off in time.
Really?
I floated down the river once. And there was a guy who was caught on the wrong side, and he's like, what do I do? How do I get out of here? And I told him, I was like, listen, you gotta hike all the way back up to that bridge up there. And, and he didn't. He actually tried to cross it and, ended up making it to the other side, but he didn't have his rod.
Swimming.
He didn't, he was swimming. He lost his rod. He lost, probably his fly boxes and everything. So
you got to watch it.
You do. Yeah. Yeah, you do for sure.
I had a guy tell me once that his trick to watching rocks is he'll put a $5 bill on a rock if he knows, something's coming. And then you will not forget to look at those rocks because you don't want to lose your $5. I thought, I don't know, that sounds like a little bit much for me, but I've noticed I've had that happen in on the North Fork of the White. I remember fishing and we had a nice hatch going on. And, when that happens, you're totally focused on the hatch.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden the fish just stopped. Just boom, It just stopped. And I looked around and that's when I realized, the rocks are disappearing. And within 5 minutes, it was raging. Like we got out of there. We didn't run, but we got out of there. And it just, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, but it was coming down pretty good.
Yeah, they pump some water through there. So, yeah.
They do. With so much information out there, it can get downright confusing and even overwhelming to find the right fishing adventure. Sorting through all the options and fees can be quite the headache. Well, not anymore. I'm super excited to introduce Got Fishing. Got Fishing is a boutique booking agency for world-class fishing adventures around the world. They ensure that you are on the exact fishing trip that meets your skill level, budget, and desired experience. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, Got Fishing's personalized service will help you decide which adventure is the best fit for you, your group, or even your business. Worry about fees? Worry no more. With Got Fishing, you won't pay anything extra because their services are entirely free for you. You see, Got Fishing exclusively partners with highly reputable outfitters who gladly compensate them for their services, ensuring a win-win situation. Explore the range of fishing adventures and learn more about the services Got Fishing provides at gotfishing.com. That's www.gotfishing.com. And check them out on Instagram, too. Huge news, folks. The #1 fishing app, and I'm talking Trout Routes here, has been updated to include the entire lower 48. That's 50,000 streams mapped and classified into 4 categories and 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. There's nothing more exciting than finding that new trout stream or access point. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy. Say goodbye to stumbling around country roads looking for your next spot, because Trout Routes provides every detail you need for each stream, including public and private bridges, stream flows, trail access, where to park, camping opportunities, boat ramps, and more. No service, no problem. You can save maps for offline use. With Trout Routes, I've found dozens of new streams and access points I never would have known about. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Well, Brian, tell me, let's flip the channel a little bit on the Deerfield, because I'm sure there's some great, wonderful things about the Deerfield that you want to talk about. So give us like the other side of it. Like, what makes this river so special, and why would people put up with all these changes in the flows? Because I know it's a great river.
Yeah, no, it is. And, and a lot of people do, they get sort of scared away by the change in flows. And it's kind of a shame because it is such a great river. There's, it's beautiful, first off, from top to bottom. It's a very rural river. It's up in the mountains, and it's upper sections, and then it goes through a high valley, and then it goes down through another sort of, set of hills, and then it comes out into the farmland in the plain of the Connecticut, before it dumps out into the Connecticut River. And it's just, in almost all of its, it goes through one, it's not a city, it's a town called Shelburne Falls of, maybe a few thousand people. And that's the urban stretch of the river there, and there's a bunch of dams there. But so first off, it's just, that's what grabbed it, for me initially, just coming up here, when I first moved to this area, I'd just go up the river, and just everywhere it's just beautiful. It's, there's, I see bear up there, you see deer. More and more these days you're seeing, tons of birds of prey, eagle, osprey, cool. Heron. And it's just, and you feel like you're a million miles away. And, and as I got to know the river, I started to find out that, there's, they stock some really nice fish in there. The Mass Department of Fish and Wildlife does, but what the true, beauty of the river is the wild fish in there. And we've really found over these past, 10, 15 years that it's a very healthy wild trout fishery, both with brown trout and rainbow trout.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's, and there are some big, big brown trout in there. They're not easy to catch, and you got to put your time in, but they're in there. So they're there.
Yeah, that's fun.
And those fish are generally wild. So the quality of fish, there may not be, the numbers of fish of, the great Western rivers and stuff. Nowhere near that many fish per mile, or even some of the, the more well-known rivers in the Northeast. But there are fish in there, and, quite a few of them, and some really, really high quality, large wild fish.
Ones.
So, yeah.
If I could ask you, what's your personal best?
My personal best in the sort of the main stem of the Deerfield was a 24-inch brown.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, and that was I caught that on the fall many years ago. But yeah, I was climbing up on these rocks, and then all of a sudden I spotted it. I was going through. There's one rapid on the river, on the upper river. I shouldn't give too much detail away here, but there's one rapid
right.
on the upper river at high water. At low water, the water's still going through there pretty good, but you can kind of climb up the rocks along it. And there's some big boulders in there too, 10 feet high or something. And so I was climbing on top of this one, just sort of working my way up, and just saw these huge fish in there. And sure enough, I was able to get it to eat my nymph as I drifted it by. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What were you using? You remember?
Yes, I was using an egg.
Oh, were you? Okay.
It was the fall time. Yeah.
There you go.
So they eat a lot of eggs,
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So, and pretty small one too, like a size 16. So.
What was the fight like?
It was fantastic. Yeah, that thing just tore offline and went cruising across, and yeah, it was good fun.
Oh, really? Did you have to chase him?
Not so much. No. I had a kind of a 5-weight switch rod, so I had a pretty heavy duty rod. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah, it was fun. But I have to say that there are much bigger fish that are taken out of that river. I just haven't had the good fortune to get into anything even bigger, but I'm pretty happy with what I did get. So
that sounds pretty nice.
Or what
to
I
me.
have gotten. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Tell us where the Deerfield River, and it's in Western Mass, but give people a sense. Where does it start? Where does it flow? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so it actually starts in southern Vermont, sort of south central Vermont, and there it starts in kind of the Green Mountains up there, and it's a pretty small stream. There are a couple of really big reservoirs up there. There's a few different branches that come together in kind of a lot closer down towards the Mass border. But it's still, even into the Mass border, it's a relatively small river, and then there's another reservoir right on the sort of Mass Vermont border. And then there's a couple stretches, and, the part that's fished the most for trout, or that we concentrate on the most, there are plenty of people who fish it up in Vermont, is the stretch in Massachusetts under what's called Fife Brook Dam.
Okay.
Which is the second or third dam in Massachusetts. There's so many of them, it's hard to keep track of. But that's kind of where, that's where the best, or the easiest access, most, really good trout fishing happens in Massachusetts. And so that's all up in the mountains. So it's a fairly steep gradient up there, marked, broken up by those two dams. But once it hits Fife, there's a great stretch of, I don't know, probably 11 miles, 12 miles before the next dam. And so it flows out of the mountains into kind of a higher valley. So it kind of, for about 6 miles, it's a fairly steep gradient, a lot of pocket water runs, pools, classic trout water. And then it gets into this kind of high valley up there in the town of Charlemont, and it flattens out a little bit and widens a little there. A couple tributaries come in and make it a little bit bigger.
Nice.
Yeah, and flows down to past the town of Charlemont and to this to another dam, and then it goes through a series of dams. That's where that town of Shelburne Falls is. It goes through a series of dams in there, and then the last dam is just down, a few miles downstream of Shelburne Falls, and then from there to the Connecticut is probably 15 miles or so, where it's also not dammed. And so there's, and there's trout fishing throughout. though it's more seasonal once you get below Shelburne Falls. Kind of the summer it gets a little too warm.
Okay.
And that's the other thing I love about the Connecticut or about the Deerfield River is that that lower stretch is really diverse, and it's loaded with smallies. The higher up, it's kind of a lot of smaller smallies. As you get down towards the Connecticut, there's some really beautiful, big, trophy-sized smallmouth. Particularly in the spring, I think a lot of fish come up out of the Connecticut to spawn. So we like to target that pre-spawn on the lower river, and have gotten some real quality fish, like 5 to 6 pound smallmouth.
That's awesome.
Yeah, really nice fish. But you can get pike down there, you can get carp down there. There's a shad run in the spring as well, which is a lot of fun.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a neat, diverse river, and a lot of it, and part of that lower river is some of the hardest to access. So it's even though it's kind of closer to the more population and some bigger towns, it's still, just rural and wild and just, it just feels really remote.
What makes it hard to access?
It cuts through a really steep canyon.
Okay.
Above the valley floor, and there are trails along either side. There's a railroad track on one side, and there's an old railroad track with that's now a hiking trail on the other. But it's a good couple hundred feet down to get to the river from those hiking trails. Yeah. So, and there aren't many trails, going from the hiking trail to the river. So you have to be pretty adventurous to access that area on foot. You can access it by boat, canoe, kayak, or we use rafts mostly.
Okay. Are you an avid angler in search of top-notch fly fishing gear that's easy on the wallet? Well, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Adams Built is the ultimate choice for anglers who prioritize quality, affordability, and style. Established in 2014, Adams Built has been the trusted companion for thousands of anglers, creating unforgettable moments on the water. Seasoned pros and beginners alike will love their lineup of lightweight and durable waders and wading boots, high-quality nets and fly rod starter kits, and meticulously designed fly boxes and outerwear. When I first heard about Adams Built, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. Having run through many pairs of waders over the years, I wondered about their guarantee. So get this, folks, all Adams Built branded products are guaranteed to last, and Adams Built waders carry a lifetime repair or replace guarantee. You only pay shipping. Hard to beat that. So why not make Adams Built Fishing Gear your go-to choice? Check them out at a dealer near you or at adamsbuiltfishing.com. That's Adam Built Fishing, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear. Hey anglers, you've heard me talking about Angler's Coffee for quite some time now, and I have a question for you. Have you tasted it yet? Well, if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. It's darn good coffee, isn't it? Hey, if you're like me, tasting's believing, and believe me, this coffee tastes great. My wife and I are hooked on it. Angler's Coffee offers an impressive spectrum of flavor profiles, so there's something for everyone. When you're spending a day on the water, you need a great cup of coffee to carry you through, like the Coachman's Blend. Named after the famous Royal Coachman, you'll love the design of the bag as much as the coffee. This blend of medium and dark roasted coffee from Central and South America produces a flavorful and smooth cup with notes of chocolate and baking spices and a smooth finish. Order some today and save 10% with a custom subscription like I did. You pick the coffee blends you want, and they're delivered right to your doorstep. And if you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. No kidding. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations in the fly fishing community. So put a smile on your face, just like I did, and give it a cast. That's Angler's Coffee. Tasting's believing. Are people wading most of these sections, or are they having to, get guides and float?
Both. So on the upper river, when they're not releasing, you can't float it because there's just not enough water. It's too rocky. You'd just be dragging over everything. So It's great to wade then. On the lower river, you can float it most of the time. At its extreme lowest, it's not that much fun to float because you're dragging a lot. But that can get, you can wade that, until it gets to a certain level, and then it's harder to fish from the bank. And when they're releasing on the higher river, there are spots you can absolutely fish it on foot, but you're limited, so you can do both, which is kind of fun.
Huh, cool. So back to the dams for a minute. If they're releasing out of one dam, could I just run up 10 miles up the river and hit the next section below another, dam?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're not always doing it at the same time. And it does become kind of like a Deerfield River art form to be able to kind of figure out those dams,
Yeah.
It took me a lot of years to kind of figure it out. And even on the upper river, you can kind of, a lot of times they'll only release for 3 hours. And so if they release at the top dam, Fife Dam at, say 11 o'clock, you can, boogie downstream 6 miles and you can get a couple hours of fishing in before that water reaches down there.
Right. Okay.
And then you can keep going downstream. And then, soon enough, they cut off up there. You can go back upriver again. So you can kind of work your way around that bubble if you need to.
So you can kind of move around. Okay.
Yeah. Alternatively, you could go below another one of the dams. And that's kind of, the dams are both sort of the bane and the boon of the river, right? I mean, it's, they disrupt everything and, they can be unpredictable. But at the same time, there's almost always a spot to fish on the river. There's one dam you can go that you can, and I'm talking wade fish when I say this. There's almost always a spot you can go and wade because, this dam may be diverting here. And it's above and beyond the dams. They just move water around too. There's a bunch of canals and they move them to transfer stations. And so a lot of the time they remove a lot of that water. So even if the river's really high, there's still not too much water behind one dam. So you can go fish that. And so it becomes, it's pretty neat, but it can be hard to figure out. So that's why we're here, I guess. Yeah.
I was going to say, that's why there's a fly shop called the Deerfield Fly Shop, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and we're happy to help people with that.
Yeah. Talk to me about public, private land. I'm on my little trout routes app here, and it looks like kind of a hodgepodge of private and public water throughout. What's it like?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's really good access, really good public access, particularly on the upper river. So if you're, above the, from all the way, from above Shelburne Falls up to, to the Vermont line, there's great access. I think the power company or the railroad company owns most of that land up there. And, and basically, anywhere there's a pullout, you can access the river. And once you're in the river, you can kind of go wherever you want. There's a little bit of private land up there, but I'm not sure how many of those private landowners actually own across the street and, and on the river. There's no houses directly on the river up there.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That I know of. Yeah.
What are the stream access laws?
They're changing. So it's, it used to be my understanding that, if you walk into the river and a spot where you're allowed to access it, as long as, you keep your feet wet and you stay below that high water mark, you should be good. But my understanding is that there have been some cases recently, where, landowners have successfully argued that they own, a certain amount of land under the river.
That's a big change.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I don't know. I haven't digged into it enough to really know, what's going on with it. That's, some of that is just kind of hearsay, but I've talked to some people who do know a little bit about it. And it's something that, I'm keeping my eye on. It's not an issue on the Deerfield because I think a lot of that land is owned by, like I said, by the power company or by the railroad. And they don't seem to care about the public access. They allow it.
Right.
And I think that's part of their deal probably to have that land.
Right.
To give that access. So, but once you get into Charlemont, there are some houses there and access can get a little spotty through there, but then, kind of major road below the town follows it and, any pull off, you can access it there. So it's
nice.
Very accessible. Yeah. And it's upper reaches through the town of Shelburne Falls, access can get a little tricky, but there are ample spots to get in and, and nobody seems to, even if there is this, this argument elsewhere that, you can own under the river. I haven't heard of that being an issue in the area around Shelburne Falls. And then as you get lower in the river, like I said, there's that big sort of canyony area on the lower river that is accessible. It's just hard to access, but it's legally accessible. And then once you get into the farmland, once you get into the valley floor, there's a lot of farmland. So access gets pretty tricky there. But that's, I like to float that lower stretch when I can anyway. It's bigger water down there, and trickier to wade.
And I had read, this seemed really backwards to me, that the brown trout are in the upper and the rainbows are in the lower. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, for the wild fish. Yeah, I wouldn't say the lower though for the rainbows, but the upper river I think of as like kind of above the Charlemont and above, and they're definitely that's where predominantly where the wild browns are, and then from kind of Charlemont and the Shelburne Falls area is where the rainbows are. There aren't a lot of wild fish in the lower stretch, which is below Shelburne Falls. There's not a lot of wild
Gotcha.
fish that I'm aware of. There may be some that come in from the Connecticut, and I'm sure there's some, but not the populations that we have in the upper half of the river, 2/3 of the river.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so I also read that this river is really well known for dry fly fishing. I was hoping you could kind of walk us through the seasons, the hatch chart, kind of your top confidence fly patterns, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's the dry fly fishing can be excellent. It can be maddening. It can be which is maybe appropriate. I wouldn't say we have the prolific hatches that some of the other better known streams might have. Like say the Farmington or the West Branch of the Delaware. We have nowhere near those types of hatches, but we have some good ones. And fish are generally eager to take a dry fly. I know a guy who comes into the shop regularly, and he fishes that upper river, and he only fishes dry flies. He does very well, and even when they're not rising. So, so we do have opportunistic fish. Yeah, I think one of the biggest drawbacks to the dams is I think it does, those spiking dams and with the peaking water releases is that I think it does have an adverse effect on the bug population.
Makes sense.
So our hatches can be, they can be frustrating because, one night there can be a great hatch up there and the next night, same conditions and nothing, and so, but when it's good, it can be great. And like I said, they can be super opportunistic. So, like right now we're in terrestrial season and, and that's great. I mean, they're definitely eager to come up and hit a chubby Chernobyl or, a big PMX, something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. Or ant patterns and, through the winter, I guess we might as well start there as far as hatches go. So not a ton of hatches right now. It's more terrestrials.
Gotcha.
But like I said, you can still prospect with, like a size 12 Adams or a size 14 Adams and, and you'll pick up fish here and there. Yeah. But as the summer wears on, we may see some flying ant hatches, which can be pretty cool. Those seem to me to be fairly random. I've hit a couple and they're just epic. It's, the water can just be just covered with these flying ants and they're fish
Oh,
rising
wow.
everywhere. Yeah. And it can be maddening too if you don't have the right size and color because there's so
Yeah,
many
I'll say.
real
Right.
ones. But but if you do, it can be great. And you can, and they find it among all those naturals. But once the summer, once we get into September, and things start to, we get some cooler nights. We should see some, we'll start to see more caddis hatching again, and then we actually get a late hatch of Cahills, kind of usually in the end of September and into October, which can be a great hatch, and the fish can be really on them, and like sizes 14 and 16. And concurrent with that, we'll start to see more and more blue-winged olives in the fall. Anywhere from probably 20s to 24s, maybe even 18s. And like I said, caddis. There's again another hatch of an Isonychia, which we'll see as well.
Nice.
And then we do get some October caddis. So they, those bigger orange ones, we'll see those in the fall as well. As the fall wears on, as we get in November, it's, as far as hatches go, it's primarily just going to be those blue-winged olives after that. But we can, you can definitely find some good dry fly action in November if you're in the right
Oh,
place
really?
at the right time. Yeah.
Huh. What size are your blue wing olives?
They're pretty small at that point, probably 20s, 22s.
Oh, well. Okay. Real small.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. And then wintertime?
Winter, I don't see much. I'm sure there are some days when the fish will get on the midges, but I rarely come across that. It's more of a nymphing game in the winter time.
Okay.
But it can, it can fish great. A lot of the kind of typical winter stuff works, kind of squirmy wormies, egg patterns. But also, bigger stonefly nymphs is a really good, just year round on the Deerfield, big stonefly nymphs work well.
Okay.
Yeah. And, and then, your kind of typical mayfly nymphs, the pheasant tails and princes and hare's
All
ears,
that
those
works.
kinds of
Okay.
things. Yeah, can work year round as well. Yeah, but once as the winter rolls out and into the spring. Our hatches, we don't see. You'll see sporadic action in April, but generally not. It's often pretty high and pretty cold. And even if you see bugs hatching, you don't often see too many fish coming up to them. But by the time May gets here, and we do get a Hendrickson hatch that can be very good, and that's usually when they start to turn on to the surface feeding.
And that's in May.
Somewhere in that Hendrickson hatch in May. Yeah,
okay.
Late April, May. The Hendrickson hatches, I love it, and I chase it up and down the river, but it can be maddening because you can just see bugs popping everywhere, but the fish just haven't keyed in on the surface yet.
Yeah, what's up with that? I've seen that.
I don't know. It's just cold, and they haven't been looking up there for a while. And then, but eventually they do find that, and so, but it's like, so you got to be out there every day because it's fun when you get on that first day when they're really chowing on the surface.
When they're looking up.
Yeah, exactly. But you may get a couple really nice hatches that that just go unmolested, and that can be kind of crazy. But once that starts, then the dry fly action is typically really good for the next 6 weeks to 2 months really. We got Cahills. We'll get sulfur hatch can be really, really good. What else? We have March Browns. And caddis are always mixed in, so there's always a chance of someone on a decent caddis hatch.
Okay, so I was expecting you to really talk a lot about midge fishing. I've seen this is a bunch of tailwaters. Does it fish like a tailwater, or maybe not?
It doesn't. No, I feel like it fishes much more like a freestone.
Okay,
in my opinion, yeah. The Swift River that I mentioned earlier, that is definitely a midge river. And you're looking at 22s to 30s, size 22s to size 30. And that's definitely,
wow.
Your more traditional,
size
typical
30?
tailwater.
Have you fished with a size 30? I have not fished with a size 30.
I do not. I have.
Yeah.
I don't think I can tie it on anymore. My eyes are just not that good. But
I got a picture of a size 36 fly on my Instagram account, and you could probably put 40 of them on a quarter, or maybe on a dime, probably. They're that small.
That's nuts. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can't even tie them onto my leader. But, but the guys that fish there regularly and do well, sometimes they say that's what you got to do. Not always, but sometimes.
Okay. So what's a good day on the Deerfield River? Say decent anglers, middle of the summer. What's a good day?
Yeah, I would say 6 to 8 fish.
Yeah,
is a solid day. You could certainly have better days. I don't know many people who catch much more than a dozen fish a day. But I'm sure there are. But yeah, 6 to 8 is I would say is a really good day.
Yeah, and how does that kind of rank compared? Like if I'm on the Farmington or the Swift, of course, I'm dealing with some big crowds over there. So you got to take in a lot more than just numbers. But how does that sort of compare to some other eastern streams?
Some of the better anglers on the Swift, they can have 20 fish days. Because when you crack the code on the Swift, it seems like every fish is eating that same fly sometimes.
Yeah.
So you can really, do well. And there's just more fish in there too, is the other thing. They're just, like I mentioned before, there's not it's not the highest density population of fish on the Deerfield, but the top end is really good. And that's what I think sets it apart and makes it, such a great river to fish. The quality of fish is really great.
And talk to me about your TU chapter out there, because they've done a lot of conservation work here, haven't they?
Yeah, they've been absolutely amazing in the past several years. They've done a lot of work to prove, because I think 10 years, probably 10 years ago, I think, the people who were fishing the river a lot, including there's a lot of guides, and a lot of those TU members and stuff were saying, we're seeing a lot of wild brown trout in there. And, we were telling that to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. No, there are no wild fish in the Deerfield. There are no wild fish in the Deerfield. So basically TU went out and set about to prove and document, they hired a scientist. They did a red study where they marked all the brown trout reds on the upper river and, counted eggs and basically just documented, with established scientists that there are wild fish here. They are actively breeding, and so Fish and Wildlife said, okay, yeah, you're right. And they,
really?
So they started sending biologists down. And since that time, between TU and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Mass Wildlife, we've done some pretty extensive studies on the brown trout up there. and found that, 80% of the browns on the upper river are wild stream
Oh,
bred
wow.
fish.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I always thought it was pretty good. I actually had to, one summer I got to the biologist, one of the state biologists is a friend of mine. And, he was doing the, the electroshocking of the river, and I got to row him because we have a raft set up with the electroshocker and everything. And I got to row him on that. And that was a wild experience, because we're just, we're shocking up all these fish. And, I knew there were a lot of wild browns in there, but it was amazing to me. It's just, because we're, 8 out of every 10 fish, were wild fish.
How do you know that, Brian? How do they know that there's I got wild
sorry, I
fish
skipped
here?
the part there. About 5 years ago, DFW started clipping the adipose fins on the stock brown trout.
Gotcha.
So, so when I did this, there'd been 2 or 3 years of that. So potentially some of the bigger fish we shocked were holdovers, but by now, pretty much all the fish in there with an adipose are going to be wild fish. So, but yeah, it was amazing to me because we'd go through like a nice run and, shock up just big brown trout.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and then 8 out of 10 of them we're netting them. Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. That's wild. That's wild.
You found that to be the case then. Okay.
Yeah, no, I had no idea. And then the other thing that really surprised me is that we were also, pulling up browns at probably like a 4 or 5 to 1, ratio to rainbows, So there's just, there are more browns than rainbows up there, stock rainbows, which is funny because your catch rate is usually the opposite. You get like 5 or 6 rainbows to every 1 brown trout you get. But I think that just goes to fish, because you're catching mostly stock fish, but you do,
easier.
you will get into a lot of those wild browns. They're just a lot smarter.
Okay. Now I gotta ask you a question, Brian. Did you go back to those holes where you're shocking up those big browns and try to catch those guys? Yeah, okay, all right. No, that was good field tactical knowledge for you. Okay, did you get one?
Yeah.
Did it work out?
I didn't because it was midsummer and they were really tough. And they're hard fish, I mean, just because you know where they are doesn't mean you're going to catch them. So, but, subsequently I've probably gotten a few fish in those. But, it made me fish some different spots, because they weren't always in the spots you thought they were going to be in. And it really opened my eyes. Like, oh, wow, they could, there could be a really big fish right there. It just kind of made me approach the river a little differently.
I remember I used to fish up in Michigan a lot, up on the Osable. I remember right in front of Gates's Lodge, story was that the DNR came through there and they shocked up like a 25-inch brown trout, like right in front of the lodge where like it just gets pounded by anglers, and they're right there is a gigantic brown trout, All right, so what's your pro tip on how do you get these big browns in the Deerfield? What are you doing when you do get them?
They're tough. I mean, they definitely, you generally, sometimes you're just going to luck into them for sure, just fishing the way you are. But, to be honest with you, I like to fish. I think I do my best fishing kind of before they stock in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Which is when?
Generally kind of April. It totally depends on the conditions. Sometimes as early as late March, but that's pretty rare. Usually it's kind of, April. Yeah, somewhere in April, early April to mid-April.
Gotcha.
So I really like to, to put my time in then. And then they, they don't stock after about late Memorial Day, but they'll stock again in the fall in like October or late September. And so sort of that period right before then too, I find can be really good. Just because I think there's, less competition from those. The rainbows that they stock are just ravenous. They just kind of eat everything that goes by. So I feel like, you have a better shot at some of those wild fish at those periods, but that's not to say you can't catch them at other times. And, and obviously, it's just, kind of fishing, they're going to be on the banks, they're not going to be in the middle of the river. Usually the rainbows will be out in the middle of the river. You may have to use different kinds of flies.
Like what, smaller or what?
You may have to go smaller, but you can, hoppers along the bank.
Okay.
It varies, but it's just, kind of putting your time in and sort of trying to figure out the places where they are. Cause they kind of, they're not gonna be in the same holes as all the stock rainbows. They'll push off to the sides. And so you have to kind of fish different places. And then the other thing is to fish at night.
I was going to say, I've seen some pictures of some big mouse patterns hanging out of big fish at night on the Deerfield.
Yeah, they just, those browns, especially on low water years, but just in the summer, they become nocturnal feeders. They just feed so much more at night.
Yeah.
And, and the big fish really do target, kind of big meals. And, there's some big fish in there that probably eat like a mouse every other day. And that's, they're not hitting every nymph that goes by. Yeah, exactly. So,
or maybe one of those stalker rainbows.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the stealth tip. I mean, that's if you want to have your best chance at getting a big brown. It's hitting it at night in the summer is definitely is gonna up your chances exponentially for sure.
Like, how selective would you say the fish are? Like, are you down to 5, 6X, or what are you using there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say super selective. As far as that goes, leader shy like that. I mean, I rarely go below 5X. If I'm fishing those really small olives in the fall, I may go down to 6X. If they're getting, if the water's really low and I'm fishing a sulfur hatch or say, I might go down to 6X. But generally 5X will get it done. I will lengthen my leader though. I will fish like a 12 to 15 foot leader.
Oh, you will? Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing too is the way you approach the fish, I think makes a huge difference. Like, cause I was at this one pool once and there's just a bunch of fish rising. It's a pretty well-known spot. And, so they get some pressure and I'm casting upstream to them. I'm getting some really nice drifts. I know what they're eating cause I can see it. They're picking Hendrickson's off of there and I'm getting nice drift after nice drift and they just won't even touch it. They won't even look at it. They won't even come up and look at it. And, so I was like, what, I was just saying, what's going on? So I ended up like, well, wait a minute, why don't I try this? And so I walked upstream, I walked kind of away and upstream and just so I could throw a downstream approach at them and a downstream cast, with a nice mend in there and boom, first pass,
no kidding.
They hit it. Yeah. So they can be fussy. Yeah, absolutely.
They were watching the leader.
Yeah, exactly. I think the first thing they saw was that, was the fly and that when you're casting it to them downstream. So.
Yeah, right. I always worry about that downstream, because downstream, Brian, you're going to pull the fly out of its mouth half the time when you're.
Yeah, a lot of the time. Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you do about that? I mean,
I mend it really aggressively ahead of time so that there's a lot of, and you kind of have to do that to get, depending on exactly what the currents are doing, but usually you have to put a fair amount of mends in it just so you're going to get that drift, by the time it goes by the fish. So,
right.
So usually there's some slack in there for me, but I've definitely had those times where it's like, there wasn't much slack or there wasn't as much slack as I thought. And I went to set it and, I just pulled it right out of there. But yeah, no, I think you just mend and, and make sure there's some slack in there.
Are you doing like hopper droppers a lot of the time? Or you just go, if you're dry fly fishing, it's just straight dries or what's your setup there?
Yeah, it depends. This time of year, a hopper dropper all day for sure.
Okay.
And a lot of the times, if I'm not seeing like a hatch with like a lot of active feeding fish, I'll definitely go hopper dropper and that works really well. In the spring, I'll use, like a big humpy or something. And, drop a nymph off of that. And then once, you get into July, I tend to switch out that humpy for like a small chubby Chernobyl. And as the summer gets later, I'll do bigger and bigger ones. Yeah. For the hoppers and stuff. But if there's a hatch going on, I'll definitely, I'm just going with that one fly.
Okay.
And, target them.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So it will matter. I mean, you may have to switch, from the dun to the spinner. And sometimes that happens, right at dark too. So, they will get fussy that way for sure.
Okay.
I've had days where, on the sulfur hatch where I'm fishing my dun and, fishing something like a sparkle dun and doing real well. And all of a sudden it's starting to get darker and they're still rising everywhere, but they're ignoring my dun. And, it's happened to me. I hate to admit it happened to me like a couple times before I really figured it out. But I'd like, finally at the end, I'd like put on my headlamp and look down and like the river's just carpeted in spinners, So I was like, okay. They just switched to spinners,
Well, it sounds like you get some good hatches then, if that's happening.
Yeah. They can.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, let's switch gears because I want to hear a little bit about you and your story. So here you are in Deerfield, Massachusetts. You have kind of quite the story about how you ended up buying a fly shop.
Yeah. So I actually came to this area originally. My daughter, who is 16 now, I actually just took her to get her learner's permit in the car.
Oh man, look out.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
Let the neighbors know.
Yeah, exactly. Get off the roads. But I moved here when she was 2 weeks old to enter a PhD program at UMass. in history. And that was great. I enjoyed that. As you know, and as I got progressed through that program, I was kind of more and more on my own time. I was teaching, but kind of the rest of the time I was scheduled, it was on my own schedule. I'm just writing my dissertation, and as a history PhD, you're just reading all the time, but you can do it whenever you want. And so I ended up spending a lot of that time fishing, when I probably
instead of
should have been
reading,
reading
huh?
more
Okay.
and writing and all that. And it just kind of dragged on. And, for some other reasons, it was becoming clear to me that, to get this PhD and to, get a teaching position, I'm probably not going to be able to stay here. And I really like it here. And I was enjoying raising my daughter in this area. And, the fishing was really good. And so I started looking for other things. I started working very part-time at the fly shop that I currently own. The former owner, a guy named Mike Dodonna, is a really good guy, a good friend of mine. But he used to guide, full-time out of the shop. And he had one guy helping him who's still at the shop, actually. And but when those two guys couldn't cover the shop, he'd bring me in. So it was very occasionally.
Okay.
But that sort of experience was like, okay, I like this. I like being in the shop. I like talking to people about fishing. So I started looking around as I realized that this PhD thing might not actually come to the conclusion I expected it would. So I was looking around for other things to do, and and so I just had one day I was just like, Mike, hey, if you ever want a partner, or you want to sell this place, let me know. And he's like, oh, okay. And a couple months later, he's like, were you serious when you said that?
He's been thinking about it for a couple of months. As a matter of fact, maybe I do want to sell this thing.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, man. Yeah. And so, so we came to, we talked about it for a few weeks, and this was the winter of 2020. This is probably February of 2020 when we really were like, okay, we're going to make this happen. And then COVID hit. And so.
Did you buy the shop and then COVID hit?
No, COVID hit. Well, I had agreed to buy the shop, and then COVID hit. So I kind of, and Mike was very understanding, and he's just like, we just stopped talking about it for a little while because, just like, well, what's going to happen? I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen then, it was just this weird time, and it was just, that early March, and, it's just like, we were just like, what's going to happen? I was like, is this just absolute folly to buy this place? When the world's about to fall apart, or the economy is about to fall apart.
I was talking to guides. I remember because that's when I started my podcast. There were guides like selling their boats, like, "Oh, this is done. I'll never guide again." It turned out to be a boom year for most fly shops.
Exactly, and and I didn't know that, but finally Mike was like, I think we were getting into April and into May, and he's like, like, Brian, listen, you gotta make a decision, because if you're not gonna buy it, I gotta start ordering and getting ready for the summer and all this other stuff. And that's just like, all right, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I had a sense, that like the last recession in this area, that outdoor stuff did okay, and so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna try it, and see what happens, and so kind of swallowed all my fears and said, okay. And, and like you said, as it turned out, it was a huge boom. People were, there was nothing else they could do that summer. You couldn't go out to eat. You couldn't go to the movies. Even just driving around, you saw more people walking around than you ever do, because people just had to get out of the house. So it was great, and it's been good since then. It's been really good since then. So
that's a great story.
Yeah. A little scary at first, but
I'll bet.
But turned out real good. Yeah. Turned out really good.
What was the hardest part about buying a fly shop? I mean, did you have a lot of retail experience? You had a little bit, I know, but what was hard about that? I imagine a lot of things.
Not much, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't, I did a little retail, but it was, as an hourly employee that didn't really care that much,
Right.
But I just, when I got into the shop, since I'd worked for Mike a little bit, I kind of knew some of the clientele, and I had ideas about, the things that I wanted to do that I might do slightly different, and, areas where I could sort of build upon what Mike had already done. And so, so I kind of took it incrementally like that. And Mike stayed on too as a guide for the shop, which was like a godsend,
Yeah.
So, every time I was like, wait, how does this computer work? Or where do I order this from? He was there and, to give me the answer and, and help me through all that stuff. So, and I also kept on the employee who had been there for a long time. And so, so I had a lot of help. So that was,
Good for you.
obviously very helpful. Yeah. And, but it was just, kind of, it took me a little while to figure out, the business end of it. But, I think the biggest thing was what I loved from the get go is just talking to people, talking to the customers and listening to them.
That's the basic stuff, just being good with people.
Yeah, and just saying, well, and they're like, well, here's what I'd like, and you can't act on everything, but but enough people come up to you, it's like, well, it's time we get some of this, and we get some of that, or don't do this
Yeah,
and don't do that,
right.
and. But what I did find, which was interesting and not hard or anything, but but it was a responsibility too, because the shop had, become a hub of the community, of the fly fishing community, and so I felt like a little bit of, not a little bit, but a responsibility to continue that and to grow that as much as I
Not
could.
to screw it up, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, because like I say, Mike had built a nice shop, out of nothing, and there's a great community of anglers out here. And I wanted to make sure, obviously that I kept them. I gave them, what they wanted and a reason to keep coming back. So,
Yeah, good for you. How about that?
yeah.
If you could do it all over again, meaning like your career, would you do anything differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot about what if I got this one job here that I didn't get, or I took this job instead of that job, or
Yeah.
no, it's been fun to do a bunch of different stuff, and
Yeah.
I've had a lot of really cool experiences, and I think in a lot of ways, I mean, fishing has been a big part of my life for the last 30 years, something that's really driven me. It's only
Sounds like it.
recently that's become a vocation, instead of just an avocation. But I think it's good that I waited, and because when I was younger, I'm not sure I would have, I could have gotten burned out. I could have gotten this,
Sure.
so it was nice that, it was at the right point in my life for this to, to happen for me. So, yeah, it was really cool.
Looking way back, what got you interested in fishing in general?
I fished as a kid and into college. Never a lot though. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was fun. It was something I do. If I did it 3 or 4 times a year, that was a lot. But it was just something. My family. There weren't many anglers in the immediate family or even the extended family. I think my grandparents on my dad's side did a little bit of fishing, but it wasn't like it wasn't something I did with them. But I just I enjoyed it. And then I don't know, after college, I was just like, man, I really like to try fly fishing. I think I might like it.
It just dawned on you. Just decided to do it.
It did. Yeah. I was thinking earlier today, I was like, oh, was there something? I was like, no, I think I just like one day I was like, I kind of want to try that. And actually my grandmother did give me a fly rod for Christmas.
Okay.
And kind of after that, it was like, it just took hold. I think I've probably fished, a minimum of 50 days a year since that day. It's just one of those things that, it just, I don't, for some reason, yeah, learning the whole it's just, what's so great about fly fishing to me is that you're constantly learning, and it's just, whether it's the cast, whether it's about the fish, the technique, all these things. It's just, there's always so much to learn and, so much to try to master, and it's just, as soon as your cast gets good, you realize how much better it could get, and all the things you're doing wrong. And, as soon as you start to catch a few fish, you realize how many fish you're not catching and, and what you could do differently and all these things you don't know about fly fishing.
Yeah.
And then there are all these other species, so it's, it's like an endless journey. Yeah. And all these places you can go, which is what's so great about your podcast, because one of the things that really draws me to fly fishing and always has is to travel places and explore and, and have that reason to be there with a fly rod, and it's just like, and, and it's just listening to some of your podcasts. There are a lot of places I never would have thought of, but I was like, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. I got to put that one on the list too,
I know it. I wish I could go to all these. I'm on show 97. I think I've probably fished 30 or 40 of these places, but I wish I had fished 96 of them, But,
exactly. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you something else. Was it, you walked away from a PhD program. Was that hard to do?
No, because it had run its course,
by
the time, it had been long enough that I'd sort of, because they kept, I was able to kind of string it along for a while, pick up a teaching gig here and there and just kind of keep that dissertation limping along for a long time. And, and after a while, it was just like, all right, it's,
kill this thing.
Who are we fooling here?
So you finally got your priorities straight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Fishing first, right? But no,
Yes,
you're running
absolutely.
a fly shop, making a living in the fishing business. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been great, man. It's been really great.
Well, what's the one thing you want people to walk away with about the Deerfield River from this podcast?
I would say it's a beautiful, scenic, remote river where you can get a stretch of river yourself, even in the busy season, if you're willing to walk a little bit. And, there's always a chance of getting a 27-inch brown trout. And I just don't know too many places where you can do that in the Northeast,
Yeah,
there are a couple, but I don't know. And I fished at a lot of these places in the Northeast, and it's just, it's the lack of crowds. Those other rivers where you can get them tend to be a lot more crowded.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, it's just, if you want some river yourself and your friends, and like I said, are willing to walk a little bit, and and you're not gonna catch a ton of huge fish necessarily, but they're there and the possibilities there, and that's
pretty cool.
That's pretty cool, and it's a river that's getting that I think is getting healthier, because we were talking about TU earlier, and one of the boons of their research and their advocacy is they've gotten the dam company to agree to up the minimum flows in the fall time. Yeah, and what that's going to do is what we discovered when we were checking out all these redds, is that the fish would come up, when the water was high, they'd build the redds, they fertilize the nests and the eggs, and then the water would go down, and all those redds would get dewatered, and they'd freeze, and they'd become not viable. So despite that, we have this really healthy population of brown trout.
Yeah.
If we put more water over those redds, it could be
all the better.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
So the best is yet to come.
So the future's bright. Yeah. And another thing that we hadn't touched on too much is that, we're finding more and more wild rainbows every year, it seems like, just anecdotally, as well as TU's doing some studies to really document it. Mass Fish and Wildlife has documented it. There's a healthy population of wild rainbows up there now too. So it's nice to be able to say that this is a river that really seems like its best days are ahead of it.
There you go. What's your favorite place to eat for the hungry, thirsty angler at the end of a day on the river?
I was prepared for this. There's a new Mexican place called Posada. I think it's Posada Grill in Shelburne Falls. That's pretty good.
Shelburne Falls. Okay.
Yeah.
Posada Grill.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go, folks. People do comment on these little tips we give them about where to eat. So I think we're sending some people some business here. So anyway.
Awesome. Yeah. I just wish they'd stay open later, because it's hard for me to get off the river before dark, and sometimes they're closed. So.
All right, there you go. Well, Brian, man, it's great having you on the show. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you, maybe book a trip?
You can find us on the web, www.deerfieldflyshop.com, on Instagram or Facebook, Deerfield Fly Shop. And yeah, our phone numbers will be there, and my email, if you have any questions about the dams or whatever. Yeah.
All right. There you go, folks. Check them out. Brian, thanks a lot. Hey, I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow. And folks, thank you so much for listening. We'll be sure to post Brian's contact information in the Destination Angler show notes and pictures of his top flight picks on our Facebook and Instagram pages. You can email me or DM me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. If you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.